evening, everyone. It's an absolute honor and privilege to be here today in conversation with my mentor and my guru, a brilliant mind and a force to reckon with, truly, Rashna Imhasly Gandhy. Today, we'll be introducing her third and latest book, The Courage to Be You, an exceptional work that is a unique blend of spirituality, psychotherapy, and mythology in a story that pushes boundaries of external limitations to look within in order to find the courage to be you. So, on that note, let's dive right in. And Rashna, why don't you tell us what this book is all about and tell us a little about the characters?
Is it on? Yeah. Well, I'm a Jungian psychologist. I don't know if you've heard of Carl Gustav Jung. He was Freud's almost successor, and then they fell apart after a while, and he started his own theory. And having been married to a Swiss, I was in Switzerland, and I got to learn about Jung and was very interested in Jungian psychology. And I did come back to India, and I discovered, that I had a lot of clients in psychology who were married. One was queer and the other not. Now, the reason for that was there's a lot of shame in this respect, and parents used to hide behind this. So one would be queer and the other wouldn't. What happens to the person who doesn't, and what kind of a marriage is that? I came to know all the backstories of what was happening, and that's how I started to heal what we call the shadow side, because it's hidden from public and you lead a secret life. You have a life of your own. And is that a kind of society that we are going to continue to take forward? So I decided in this third book to take characters, thank you, to take characters who are forced by their parents because the parents approve of those two and their childhood sort of friends. And there's Amit and there's Rajeshwari, who are their childhood friends, but they have absolutely no sort of attraction to each other, so to say, and they're forced to get married. And how we in therapy deal with each person to have the courage to go through the different aspects of their life in order to come out, be open, and solve their dilemma. So it's Amit who finds then his partner, who's a Muslim. I take the Hindu-Muslim aspect also into the question because there's a lot of discrepancy there. And then I take Rajeshwari, who has been sexually abused when she was young because a family had misused her, and how we heal these two different personalities, and the story emerges how we bring them to heal themselves. So basically, that was the backdrop of the book. And I want to say that as we progress through the chapters to heal them, it's not necessarily the story of those two, but I've taken different aspects of healing with different people, but they are true episodes which are there, how we heal them. So it's fictionalized, but showing how healing takes place.
And these are taken from accounts of true stories that you've worked with clients that you've worked with?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, anonymized and fictionalized.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Why this story and why now? Why is it relevant today?
Well, basically, I saw so much suffering, which only we seem to see behind closed doors. What kind of life do they lead behind these closed doors? There's so much secrecy. There's a kind of shame, and the parents basically put their shame onto the children, that they don't want to admit that their children, one may be gay, and so it's the whole thing of hiding this whole secrecy. And then I got to see through therapy what these people go through. I mean, it's really sad stories, and how we can heal them, and how they can change, how there is a way to bring them, to listen to their inner voice and to change and to reform and to come out in the open and find their own partners. So that's how I decided to make the kind of story of these two and how they find their own partners.
How did you come about writing this book? Could you tell us a little about your journey, your own journey through this?
Well, I also went through a difficult moment in my life. I was all of 21, and I fell in love with a person who was not from my religion. He was a Swiss. He happens to be here. And much against my family. Actually, my grandfather was Zoroastrian and very, very against the whole my getting married. And he told my father that, in fact, you'll have to leave the house if you allow her. I'm not going to allow this to happen at all. And he had even stopped my grandmother from going into other people's marriages if they were marrying outside the caste system of the Parsis or the Zoroastrians. And so my father said, look, you will get married and go away, but what am I going to do? We'll be in a fix, we have a joint family and so on. So I decided, my father used to go to Swami Muktananda for all his problems when he had a strike in his company or so. I said, why don't we go and ask Baba? So we went to Baba and he listened and he said, well, where is the boy? I said, he's in Switzerland. So he said, without seeing him, I can't make any judgment. Call the boy, let him come. So his student, both of us, young, in love, not caring a hang about anything, he came over and we went to Baba, and Baba had one look at him. He didn't even talk to him or anything. And he said, is this better? Is this okay? Okay. So he said, he looked at him and then he said to my father that don't worry about the color of his skin, his heart is all right. So then my father said, but what do I do with my father? He's going to throw me out of the house and so on. So he said, well, you tell him that I will do the blessing in my ashram here. So then going home, my father said, now you go and tell the old man. So I went up and I said, look, Baba is going to give the Ashirvad in the ashram. All I want is your Ashirvad. But he said, yes, but you're putting the gun on my chest and you're taking my Ashirvad. Anyway, so that was my journey. And somehow or the other, my grandfather, even though he didn't belong to the ashram or believe in the guru. He knew he had to relent. And I didn't realize then that I had started my journey of what we call in psychology the journey of individuation. That was my journey that I started, and I started to look at that aspect, how we can find our inner voice and have the strength and go ahead. So that's how.
So interesting that you had a personal journey of individuation, also corresponding with all your learnings from Carl Jung. Did you have any other philosophical, literary, or other influences that shaped this work?
Yeah, because I started studying Jung at that time back in Switzerland. I was very much into Jungian psychology, and I started to see the archetypes of the unconscious. And archetypes are repeating patterns, which you can see in journeys. And Joseph Campbell wrote, he was a Jungian too, and he wrote an absolutely fabulous book called Hero with 1,000 Faces. And there he takes cross-cultural myths throughout, the world, and shows how individuation happens at different stages of one's life. And I found that so fascinating to see that, my God, there is, archetypes are not just mythologies, but they are actually stories of humans which have, when an archetype is awakened, there's a storyline, and there are path breakers, and there are different stages of consciousness. And what I also started to see was that basically archetypes are such stories that you can use even in films, and that films also show how you can break a certain rule and how you get to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. They're stages of consciousness, basically.
And Campbell also talks about that in his book.
Yeah, that's the basic book that shows cross-cultural mythology.
How did your professional psychotherapy journey begin? Could you tell us a little about that and your therapeutic approach in the sessions room with clients?
Basically, Jung is also considered a transpersonal psychologist. Now, what is transpersonal psychology? There was a conference in Bombay in 1979 where transpersonal psychology came from the West Coast, California, and they gave a conference in Bombay. And they had invited people like, of course, Swami Muktananda was one of them, and my father's office in the gallery was his back office. Then we had Parsi priest, head priest, who was invited. Then we had Dalai Lama. And I thought, what on earth has psychology to do with all these spiritual people coming here? I had no idea. So my father said that since you're so interested in Jungian psychology, why don't you come for the conference? And I came for that conference, and it was a life-changing moment for me, because at the end of the conference, I saw that psychology was so close to spirituality, and that the spiritual path they had brought together. And Stan Groff, who was the president of the transpersonal psychology, at the end of the conference said, is there anybody, we take these conferences to different parts of the world, is there anybody who would like to take it to their country? Please put your hand up. And I put my hand up. And the next conference was in Switzerland. And for 18 months, we had people coming from California, and I got to do the training, every time somebody new came. So I started to integrate the transpersonal spiritual dimension with psychology, which Jung was so close to. And in fact, I think I talk about the chakras right now because Jung and Freud separated from each other because they couldn't see eye to eye. And in fact, Jung started his journey to individuate and move away from his mentor figure. And he came across in Zurich University a lecture series of the Sat Chakra Nirupama, the 7 chakras. And he was so fascinated that he said, my God, I've been thinking on these lines of stages of development. And there's an ancient theory that already exists. And so he incorporated exactly the chakras and gave his own individuation, showing how these stages can be, sort of added to the chakra healing, and how each chakra also has the shadow side where you're not open about something and you're closed, and at each stage, if there is a blockage, how you can work with that. So I was absolutely fascinated, and of course I at one stage thought I'd love to once write a book on that. And so during COVID, when I had time, I thought I'm going to weave this story into chakras to show how healing is possible.
And a lot of us in India are familiar with the chakras, but for those who aren't, just to give a brief understanding, it's the belief that the body is sort of made of 7 chakras or energy centers from the tailbone upwards along the spine, and that this entire thing becomes your energy body, and each chakra is symbolic of certain sort of characteristics, stages, and also in charge of certain organs in those areas that then may be affected by repressed emotions that are corresponding to those.
Exactly. For instance, if you're not able to talk about something, it's your throat chakra, you keep secrets inside you. You have to open up. That's, the 5th chakra. So each stage there is, light and shade, and how we can also find out which chakra is blocked just by talking to them, and find out what needs to open up and what needs to come into the light, and have the courage to be you.
So interesting, you found a bridge between psychotherapy, which is in a sense quite modern and Western, and this ancient spiritual sort of system of the chakras over here. Coming to the psychotherapy part of it, can we walk our audience through a typical session?
Yeah.
And maybe look at
how we do this sort of therapeutically.
Amit. Yeah. The case of Amit.
Yeah. Just to give you an idea how it's done in
page 22.
So I'll be the psychoanalyst and you be Amit?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I'm speaking to the gay person who's Amit. How can I help you? What's troubling you that you seek my help right now?
I've never had any close relationships. I've always been a loner. In school too, I was never able to form close relationships. I love reading and I hate sports. Due to the lack of exercise, I've put on weight, so the doctor suggested that I see a therapist. I hate my body and I can't seem to lose any weight.
You may just happen to be an introvert and enjoy your own company. There's nothing wrong in that. Many children don't know the reason for their excess weight. But fat can also be an armor to protect young persons from being hurt. There may be deeper reasons why you hate your body.
What do you mean by deeper reasons?
Well, while you were growing up, what were the kind of friendships that you had? Were they with boys or girls?
I had very few friendships. I used to prefer reading rather than playing football or cricket. I grew up with one friend who is the daughter of my parents' best friends, but she is like a sister. She's close, but in a fraternal way. I've never had any romantic relationship with anybody so far, and I do not feel any romantic inclinations towards her either.
Well, I'd like to close your eyes and ask you to think about people you may have admired while you were growing up. Persons from whom you felt a kind of passion to be friends with, or which you may have admired.
So Amit, with his eyes closed.
It's
Of
very
course.
important to close the eyes because it's the same REM movement that we do, the part of the brain that we use in dreams, because you're seeing images. So that's why eyes closed. Go ahead.
Of course, I had plenty of people I fantasized about, but they were always people who I was sure would never be interested in me.
In your fantasy, were they male or female?
Well, as a boy, I had no chance to know any females except this one sister-like person that I grew up with. Most of the people I grew up with were boys. I was in a boys' school, so it was mainly boys I fantasized about. But they were not the ones I interacted with daily. These remained shadow figures in my mind.
Amit, I would like to ask you one question. What do you think about homosexuality and romantic relationships between persons of the same sex?
Well, I think it is a crime, and I have grown up in a boys' school where they made fun of boys who we all called pansies. So I began to hate such people too.
Amit, has it ever occurred to you that you grew up in an atmosphere where you were conditioned to be homophobic?
In a visibly shocked state, his eyes filling up with sudden realization that it may be the truth, but he's afraid to face it. Oh my God, you seem to have touched something very deep. I never realized that I hate homos and used to look down upon them and judge them. But I may be one myself, and yet I would hate to discover that I am.
Why do you hate them? What's wrong in loving somebody of the same sex?
Well, firstly, until recently it was against the law in our country. I know this has changed now after the Supreme Court has scrapped Article 377 of the Indian Penal Code. However, people still look down on homosexuals and do not respect those who have come out openly. In school, we used to call them queer, and this is not going to change just because a law has been scrapped recently.
I would like to now consider the question, who made these laws in the first place? Were they made by man or by God? And which God made these laws? If such laws are man-made, how can human beings play God and forbid something that nature has given us, namely the inclination to love a person of the same sex?
But then those who have come out today are still looked down upon.
In whose eyes?
In the eyes of my parents and relatives, for instance, and all the people whom I knew and grew up with in school, the teachers, the students, and the friends that I made since.
Amit, does that mean that you are not against homosexuality or two people? No, that's you. Sorry, that's your side.
Yes. Does that mean that you're not against homosexuality or two people who love each other belonging to the same sex?
I am for nature and the way God made each individual. Each is born as a seed that becomes the unique tree that it was meant to become. But we shall talk about that in detail in our next session. In the meantime, I'm going to give you some homework to read up, which may pertain to your present state of depression. I would like you to think about these issues and see if they relate to what's happening to you in your life right now. So this is about what we would talk about in a first session, just to get to know where they are and what are the feelings.
So Amit's suppressed homosexuality seems to have sort of come out and bubbled to the surface at a point in the story where he and his childhood friend Rajeshwari are sort of being forced to unwillingly enter a marriage with each other. And Rajeshwari, at this point, we turn to her. Like so many women, she's a survivor of child sexual abuse, and this impacts her future as an adult. Could you take us through her therapy journey?
Which page? 77. Yeah. Yeah. Rajeshwari, I'm glad that you've taken the first step by coming to seek help. In fact, it's the second step, as you've already been open enough to share your secret with Amit, who has confided to me about the childhood abuse that seems to be the root cause of your problems today. I understand from our phone conversation that you made this appointment and a lot of things fell into place for you with your present reactions when you read up the second chakra notes which Amit had shared with you. All abuses to one's body traumatize and betray the most precious energy, which is that of being loved. Sadly, many such abuses occur within the context of close family relationships and the people whom we love and need to trust. When we experience early trauma in childhood, it often remains hidden beyond our awareness. We know there is a problem, but we can't seem to figure it out. Instead, we surmise that we are the problem because we have little control over the situation and seem to be in an unsafe space to control our emotions. The instinctive reaction is to shut down the connection and close our heart. Any form of abuse diminishes our ability to trust and love and connect. When the relationships are distorted at an early age or later when they are abused by people whom we trust, or our sense of connection is impaired, preventing us from coming into a sense of our own being. Adult survivors of abuse often feel disembodied and have poor boundaries in their adult romantic relationships, which corroborate and perpetuate recurring feelings. Abuse interferes with our love lives, and we are unable to meet life with hope and enthusiasm. We feel the fault lies within ourselves, to which we are blind and helpless as we unknowingly abandon ourselves.
And helplessness is such a central part of what survivors go through. I mean, having worked with survivors of sexual abuse and other forms of abuse myself, I see that, and it's such a difficult and effortful journey to sort of move through the fear, move through all of that pain, to then reclaim your body first, and also your mind and your power and your spirit. After it's been sort of trod upon. This work is not only one of psychotherapy and chakras that we've delved into so far. It's also one of myths. And one very interesting ancient myth you've talked about is that of Lord Shiva and Mohini. Could you read that myth to us? It was a very interesting
has anybody heard of the myth of Shiva and Mohini? How many people have heard of that? Not many, very few. Do you know who Mohini is? No. Mohini is an avatar of Vishnu. And I had no idea about this myth. I mean, I do read a lot of Indian myths, but I was completely oblivious about this one. And I had finished the book. It was complete. And I had such a strange experience because the myth came to me. And you know how it came to me? I'm sitting in Switzerland in our little chalet, and I was working on a client, and I had put on Karnataka music, and between one song and the second song, the music stops, and this myth is coming across on the radio to me. And I said, excuse me, this is an amazing story. And then, of course, I researched it, and it's such an extraordinary story. that completes the book, because our Indian philosophy, they treat these archetypes that are human in a human way. They don't forbid anything, because it's part of growing, it's part of our transformation. And this is such a beautiful myth. So maybe we read it quickly. The myth of Shiva Mohini and the birth of Hariharaputra. The Sabrimala Ayyappa temple in Kerala, South India, is one of the most intriguing pilgrimage sites in Hinduism, because it transgresses gender lines, attracting millions of devotees every year. The temple is dedicated to Lord Ayyappan, a deity known for his association with dharma and righteousness and asceticism. The story of the temple is deeply intertwined with mythology, tradition, and religious practices. The South Indian myth of Shiva marrying Vishnu in the form of Mohini and producing a child, Ayyappan, offers a profound insight into societal values. The story symbolizes the alluring power of Maya, or illusion. According to Hindu mythology, Lord Ayyappan is the son of Shiva and the divine feminine energy Mohini, an avatar of Lord Vishnu. The story begins with the churning of the ocean, the Samudra Manthan. The gods and the demons, to obtain the nectar of immortality, or the Amrit. During this process, Lord Vishnu takes the form of Mohini, a beautiful enchantress, to distract the demons and ensure that the gods receive the nectar. It's believed that Ayyappan was born from the union of Shiva and Mohini, embodying the combined powers of both gods. Now, what is the symbolism of the churning of the ocean? It's the process of individuation. The churning of the ocean is a metaphor for this process, which we in Jungian psychology call individuation. The process involves the stirring up of the unconscious ocean, bringing forth the elixir of immortality or self-realization through the integration of opposites, the gods and the demons. They're not some demons outside ourselves, they're the demons within. In other words, the nectar of immortality, which is obtained through the churning, symbolizes the ultimate goal of individuation and the achievement of wholeness, the emergence of the real self, the central archetype in Jungian psychology, representing the fully integrated personality. The myth of Shiva and Vishnu as Mohini in the birth of Ayyappan is a rich allegory of Jungian process of individuation. The interplay between the masculine and the feminine principles, the confrontation with the shadow, and the ultimate emergence of the divine child, which is born from this union, which is Ayyappa. It illustrates the journey towards self-realization and the integration of the different aspects of the psyche. Each god archetype in the myth serves as a symbol for the key elements of this psychological process, offering deep insights into the nature of consciousness, duality, and the path to wholeness. Now, every person in the myth, I'm not going to read the whole myth because you all will have to, those who are interested will read it for yourselves. But we will do.
Read the last.
Yes. Jungian symbolism of Ayyappan, the child born of Shiva and Mohini, represents the archetype of the divine child. He becomes the hero, the new emerging self in the story. In Jungian terms, the divine child symbolizes the potential for growth, renewal, and the future self. A new consciousness that arises from the union of opposites of the Shiva and Mohini. We're going to do...
Goes to show how evolved these symbolisms were back then, pre-Victorian sort of morality that crept into our society, and how inclusive it was, not barring gender lines and binaries.
Exactly.
Even way back then. Yeah. Very interesting stories to read. Speaking of myths, a paragraph that really made me pause and think in the second chapter. I'd really like to read that. It's very short. Um, so it says, but the fact that Amit had got the first signal of acceptance and compassion from his psychoanalyst, who acts as his mentor on the hero's journey, allows him to enter a new space. And we're talking about very real world issues that we're dealing with in a modern day psychotherapy setting. And since we were talking about myths, it sort of made me pause there to think, Rashna, would it be fair to draw a parallel here with the role of Narada in the myth of Ayappa?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Ayappa is there, and Narada is the kind of Socrates figure who, questioning. And so here in the myth, as Ayappa, Narada comes in and says he's the divine sage, a well-known figure in Hindu mythology, often depicted as a troublemaker or a wise sage who provokes discussions that lead to the discovery of deeper truths, says to Ayappan, I have a very simple question for you. How are you related to the wife of your mother and the wife of your father? Ayappan starts thinking about this and ponders, how am I related to Shiva's wife and to Vishnu's wife? He's so deep in thought that he left the heavens to came down to Sabrimala, losing his seat in heaven. He ponders over the fact, maybe Shiva's consort is Parvati, who is my father's wife, but not my mother. But perhaps I can call her my stepmother. But then, what do I do with Lakshmi, who's Vishnu's partner? How do I describe my father, who's also my mother, and who's sometimes a woman and sometimes a man? How do I describe her as a wife to anybody? In fact, Ayappan doesn't even know what their genders are, because Shiva and Parvati and Vishnu and Lakshmi often come together in one idol as Ardhanarishvara. As the legend, the male and the female are together, having integrated their male and female aspects within themselves.
Truly, there's such a transformative aspect to these myths, isn't it?
And then when he continues to ask, who are you? Who are you? He finally says, Tattvam Asi, I am that. And that's, truly reaching transcendence. It's a beautiful myth in our culture.
So before we close and open to questions, I have one last question for you, bringing you back to today and society. What are your thoughts on what might happen now? How do you think things might emerge for our society going ahead?
Well, I was in Switzerland listening to the court cases while the laws were being passed whether the queer could marry and have a legal status. And unfortunately, after 10 days of listening online, because nowadays you can listen online, I found that it was not passed, because out of the 5 judges, 3 said no and 2 said yes, but then it wasn't passed. And so I decided to end the book also on a spiritual note. Should I tell a little bit of it? I'm not allowed to tell.
No giving away the end of the story. Let people read the book.
Anyway, I end it on a spiritual note, because I do give the couples the courage to listen to their Antaratma, because even, in our dreams, we do get in touch with this Antaratma of us. And Jung had come across a very incredible story where he had met his inner, he called him Philemon, And he became a very sort of character for him that he used to discuss and talk to him. And he said insights which came from Philemon were not the same as my ego. They were very strange, very beautiful. And so he had these conversations with his, what we call the higher self or the Antaratma in Indian philosophy. So many years later, an Indian who was Gandhiji's follower came to see him, and Jung asked him, do you have a guru? And he said, yeah. He said, who? He said, Shankaracharya. So he said, Shankaracharya, you mean the one who wrote the Vedas many years ago, many centuries ago? He said, yes. So he said, you mean you imagine him? He said, yes, I do. I talk to him. And he gives me answers. So Jung said, oh, I hit upon something that the Indians use as the Antaratma. And so in our therapy work also, we work a lot, not giving our clients answers, but asking them to get in touch with that part of themselves. And so that is the way I try to help people to find their inner voice. And yes, it's going to take a long time to change. We can't change the collective unconscious that has been working for so many years in our country. We can't fight that. But change is happening in the rest of the world, and it will affect us. And slowly we will come to that with patience and hope. So on that hope,
So necessary today.
I think we can open it for questions.
Yeah.
I'd just like to mention one quick thing, that this book actually had written because when I came to India, I didn't know anything about Indian mythology. And I found that Indian mythology is so incredible because it's so often the same, like Eros, and this book came out called Psychology of Love, Wisdom of Indian Mythology. And Eros and Kama have very similar archetypal behavior pattern. The only difference is that Kama, same as Eros, but also has these arrows and causes confusion in people and so on. But even though Kama manages to unsettle Shiva, who is the great meditator, and at one stage Shiva says enough is enough, and he burns him with his third eye, and he becomes Manmatha. It's so incredible how transformation happens in the Indian myths, whereas the Greek ones, Eros remains this little boy throwing arrows. The archetype doesn't really change. So I thought it's nice to show the transformation. It's come out as a new edition of the first book.
One question. I'm not very familiar with Jung's work, but I'm curious to know what someone who's working from that perspective. What are your thoughts on Carl Rogers' ideas of real self and ideal self? I'm just curious to hear your opinion.
Yeah, more humanistic. You've studied Carl Rogers?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I haven't, so I'm not going to comment on that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can take that,
Yeah, please.
Carl Rogers is much more talking about humanistic perspectives, giving unconditional positive regard
Yes.
to your clients. I mean, it's not that there's an absolute divide. I think in most theories of psychotherapy there is some overlap, usually. But Jung went quite a bit into Philemon and the higher self, and was of course because of contemporary of Freud, that whole era was a little deep into this stuff. Rogerian work is something most of us do irrespective, because it's where you're placed as a therapist in a setting of psychotherapy where you're sort of there for your client, and it's really helpful to embody those principles that he talked about, because it's one of the best ways to get through to someone, giving them unconditional positive regard. And in some sense it does tie into what we call co-regulation with the energy exchange in that sense. And energy exchange is also what we're talking about here with the chakra system, and the energy body of the individual. So it all ties in together somewhere.
So is Carl Rogers studied in India?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I didn't study in India, so I couldn't answer that question. I've studied in Switzerland and in America. So sorry, I
No,
couldn't
it's
answer.
okay. I see,
She
got
was
the
unable to,
response.
yeah.
Thank you.
No, I have a question on what
Yeah.
you mentioned, something that, I noticed that in a pre-Victorian era, which I think lasts for about 3,000 years, we seem to have accepted this as a part, this conflict as a part of our society, our tradition, and our mythology. How is it that in a matter of 200 years we changed? Why was it so fragile that we now have difficulties in accepting it? What went wrong, or what was happening here?
It's, when several people are taught certain things, just to give you an idea, when the Khajuraho temples were discovered during the British time, Mahatma Gandhi wrote a letter publicly saying that it's a very decadent period of Indian Hindu mythology. And Rabindranath Tagore wrote again in the newspaper to say that Gandhiji, you should go deeper into your philosophy to voice your views. And Gandhiji again in the newspaper apologizes.
Oh.
So it was already happening, that the culture was being changed through the collective behavior of the Christianity which came in, and what is allowed and what is not allowed, and what is legal, illegal. And so you start to, through the schooling and through the collective behavior, our minds in the ends are our computers, and whatever is fed into the computer you start to believe. And so the mind slowly started changing, and we lost our ancient wisdom, which I think we need to go back to.
Yeah.
Because there's so much transformation in our midst, it's not funny. They're profound.
Shiva's story, but it didn't really explain why Ayyappa's temple only men are allowed. Since you have read up so much on the mythology, maybe you can explain that also. And if you allow me another question, Vikram, I'll ask another one. Vikram, one more question? Yeah. The other question is, we're just talking about the opening of the thing towards same gender sex. We also had Draupadi, who had 5 husbands, and she was respected. And now that in North India is it's totally different. Women are not even allowed to come out from that kind of spirit of freedom and to something less than a slave. I think our society has traveled back a lot. And we had even writers, and it's called Molla, she wrote Ramayana. So we had people who wrote books and they were accepted. Today again, not today, some time back, women again had a problem with studies, again that retrograde society. Just your thoughts on that, thanks.
The subject, because, the whole subject of women not going into temples and so on is something that is being held as a very sacred thing for a very long time. And so it's got mixed up with who Ayyappa is as a deity. Actually, he has reached the highest chakra because he's the hero in the myth. There are different stages of transformation, and he's arrived, sort of. He's the new hero who is Tattvam Asi, he is that. He knows who he is. He sees God in all. So to reject women, of course, it's strange. And the law did try to change it. But there's also this age-old belief that women pollute. When you go into a temple, even, in our Zoroastrian custom, when we have our period, we are not allowed to go in, or you're told not to go in. So you just believe that, But basically, Ayyappa came down to, if you look at the myth, I'm only talking about the myth. I'm not talking about what goes on in our heads and how we have transformed those beliefs. But I'm talking about what he is saying is that he has ultimately reached liberation. So, of course, it would be great if women would also be allowed to go and also, worship that part of themselves. But it will take time. It's not going to happen now because these beliefs are so deep within us. And the Supreme Court tried to change it, and it didn't happen. And in fact, I wrote a letter to Shashi Tharoor because he was sitting with the Supreme Court judge at one of the lit fests. And he was saying that he tried to imbibe this, but that the women themselves said they wouldn't go. So he said, it's not yet time. Who am I to sit there and tell them what to do? We had sati in our, and it took a long time to change. So these things we can't change from one day to another. And we have to try to, with consciousness, to see what the meaning of the true myth is. What is it trying to say? What is the truth? And bring those opposites together instead of just, fighting with each other. She was forced to marry actually. She didn't choose to, right? And she's I think, wonderful figure. I've written about Draupadi very much in my Emerging Feminine. I have written quite extensively on her.
My question sort of relates to the earlier question about, how Victorian ideals came in during colonial times. And but also, I was thinking about it in the context of decolonial therapists and how they're approaching, the importance of community in therapy, and not just being focused on therapizing the individual, but thinking about how important it is for transformation in the collective for healing to take place. So I wonder, when, for instance, if we're thinking about the liberation of queer people in Indian society, whether just thinking about how queer people can be supported to sort of live an authentic life for themselves is enough, and whether it's, just as important, if not more important, to bring about social transformation in the way that, because it can often be very, very huge inhibition to healing when extremely important figures in your life, like your parents, are not accepting of who you are as a person.
I do deal with that a lot because the parents' generation is so steeped in what they think is right, and society is moving on, and the new inputs that are coming, especially at the rate at which we are looking at media and the way AI is affecting us and the way things are changing at such a fast. I mean, the parents are aghast. They can't accept what's going on, and to see how fast things are changing. And I see that in therapy all the time. And I do think that it's so important that we have, more social movements where they can, I agree with you that it should move at a faster rate would be for the youth. That's why I feel I felt I had to write this book for the youth. And I'm glad to say that it's doing very well because I just heard from one article that came out that suddenly they've run out of copies in Amazon, so that's a good sign.
Can I also say something small, but in here? Sorry. But as a therapist also who's very much in alignment with what you're saying over there, the importance of decolonizing therapy is monumental because it's really such a struggle and such a mark of frustration that each of us go through. A lot of fellow therapists feel this way when we're working with individuals who are oppressed by so many discriminating factors. There's caste, there's gender, there's just marginalization based on so many different things, economic status, and however much you work with the individual week by week, I mean, there's a certain amount of transformation that does happen, yes. But the hyperfixation on, yes, we will only work with the individual and the problem is only yours. The problem is you. I think this would be a wasted platform if I don't bring up this point of systemic struggles, which I think is something you're alluding to there. Because you work so far with an individual and they hit a roadblock, and you work a little more and they hit a roadblock. And those roadblocks are not only their own, they're also imposed by all these restrictions from society, from the collective unconscious, which is what we were talking about here, that confine the person within those bounds and put you in a box. And a Dalit is always a Dalit, and a transgender person is always a transgender person. And the idea that there is equal opportunity out there is as much of a myth as it ever was. And I mean, I'm saying this here today because we're not just psychologists here, we're people from all walks of life. And as someone who's seeing this, working with people on a day-to-day basis, I think it's really important for us to be thinking about these things and thinking about what we can do towards shifting this sort of narrative, shifting these ideas of putting people in these confines, and expanding our horizons to be more inclusive, to be more elevating of others and uplifting of others, rather than sticking them in boxes and making us...
You know, the stories that come out of love jihad, for instance, all the time in the newspapers, because you're the wrong, you know, the wrong caste or the wrong Hindu or Muslim, and what people go through. And, you know, love is an energy, it's an archetype, you can't help it, you know, and yet it's so difficult to bridge that in our multicultural thing. And this myth of Ayyappan, he has a mentor who's a Muslim, and it's such an inclusive, beautiful myth, because Vavhar, first he fights him, and then he becomes his mentor, and then they both transform together. And even today, I think the person who is from South India, you will know that when you do the Sabrimala pilgrimage, even today, you first have to go to the Muslim mosque and pay your obeisance, do the thing, come back, again pay your obeisance. It's bringing Hindu-Muslim unity. Such a beautiful part. And this is what we have to work on, not divide and rule. This is transcendence. This is what we try to bring out.
First question you had asked me is, you seem a bit young, what brings you here? If you look around the people attending here today, maybe 20% are youth, and sorry, I'm not saying senior citizens here, pardon me for that. The question, ma'am, is you're talking about shadow, mask, integrating through individualization process and all. As a 40-year-old, I find it very hard to, like in your story, Amit, to have a proper conversation with people of my age. They wouldn't understand what I'm trying to say. In the our country is primarily youngsters, and if they are going to lead us into the future and globally, individually, few people cannot uplift the collective conscious. And today, when the whole world is choosing wrong heroes, say Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or whoever, who are only chasing glory and success, not individualization or going inside to seek truth. How we as a society and maybe Manthan as a small community can help bring that awareness in the today's youth, because they are all doom scrolling, spending time on reels, and wasting thousands of hours on social media. So how do you see that while we as individuals can do our two cents in our own families, collectively how can we, may not be even, I'm not even talking about improving the collective conscious, how can we ensure that it won't deteriorate further?
I think we learn from our own stories where we have suffered and see that we don't do the same thing to our children and our future. I have been doing group work also, and have tried a lot through the group therapy to spread ideas of change, because it's so unnecessary when we are so caught up in what we think the next generation should do, and the change is happening so fast, and you know, there's so much suffering when we are not accepting this change that's coming about. And each one of us has to do our best in whatever way. And I think you were telling me that you're doing it through companies that you represent, where you use this kind of thing. Would you like to talk about that? How you use it? I was so surprised to hear that you use Jungian.
Actually, you are using it in the realm of psychology. I deal in consumer psychology and behavioral economics and brand building. So we use Carl Jung's archetypes to narrate stories about brands because they stick around, because they appeal to your existing personas. But while speaking about it, when I'm training my next generation of team or my kid or all, I try to talk a little beyond brands. Brands across the world use, like Nike uses Hero, same shoes, Woodland uses an explorer archetype. But beyond using it for commercial or brand building purpose, I also try to bring in a little bit of Freudian and some Viktor Frankl's theories. And these days we have some intelligent, wise people like Yuval Noah Harari, who's trying to uplift the collective conscious, and how stories have, while the mythology is beautiful to learn, unfortunately, I think negative news, how it spreads, like if you see news, majority news sells because negativity, society attracts it much. I mean, they pay attention more to it. So through mythology, I think the world has actually learned how, than learning how not to be, they picked up certain things, and the whole storytelling, how it had gone wrong, at what point, I don't know, but this whole cultural divide. We talk a lot about patriotism. I don't understand. I went to Bangladesh border, China border, just a piece of land. I don't understand why people die in the name of nation, or kill in the name of religion, or die for a story that is constructed, a God. So has God made man, or man made the God? While God, I mean, somebody said, don't tell my maid there is no God, she will kill me in the midnight. So we need to protect the story of God. But this whole divide, the whole unrest that is there today, is because they have not understood the underlying message behind the story. They have only taken the myth in it, I think, but left behind the moral, the whole science behind it, yeah. So we use all those in our sessions when we address little smaller groups like this.
Yeah. Thank you. I, in fact, wanted to, my idea was to spread this story. I wanted to write a script and make a film because today nobody reads books. And I thought it will be much better to write I wanted this to be a film script. I realized at one stage, and that many people see the film rather than read a book. But I realized I am not a script writer, so I'm hoping, and I've written it in the introduction, that I hope that someday somebody will read this and make a film out of it, because then a bigger crowd will be able to get the idea.
Made me come here are the words, a gay man confronting familial expectations. So that answers your question, maybe. And then I do not read a lot, while I will try going forward. So a lot of these intellectual conversations kind of go over my head. But then I kind of relate to bits and pieces here and there. Maybe when you said, to close your eyes and imagine yourself as a child, what were you looking up to? Or when you were talking about the story of Harihara, the myth. These are the points I connect here and there. So my question being, a lot of these practices, so people love religion, people follow religion or the myth, what it says. And say sati is a practice that came from mythology as well. They've taken the part of it and then they followed. And you were mentioning how Shashi Tharoor sir was saying about how it took a long time to break that. So my question is, say something is accepted in the mythology is being followed for a longer time, and if it's wrong, it's taking us time to break it. Now, being queer is also something that was accepted in the mythology, right? The story of Shikhandi, being queer. The story of Shikhandi or Kinneras and Kimpurushas. This was all accepted in the mythology. But then, why did the break happen and they did not come forward? Like the stories, they never came forward, and now at this point, again, we are having to bring them forward to get back acceptance.
Colonial period came in and we lost what we had, and it influenced us because a whole different culture was ruling us. And we need to go back and find our own roots. Yeah, but we have to have the strength. That's why I've just tried to give people the strength to listen to their inner voice and work with themselves to change the world. You can't change the others, but you can change yourself. And I think now people are beginning to, I think we have to wind up. Yes?
We'll wind up, yeah?
Yes.
Hello, ma'am. I have a question.
Yes.
So, I would like to say that instead of glorifying mythology and understanding our society and our problems through mythology, we should move towards rationality and empathy for others. That would be a better mantra than focusing on chakras or energy or even, because in my understanding, religion will teach you 100 good things, but then follow up with the most blatant misogyny you'll ever see in your life. So, to say that, we can take examples of Ayyappa or banning women from going there, which is already resolved in 2018, but for years it has been that custom that women were not allowed in that sacred space. So I would say that instead of even considering mythology or energy or chakras or psychotherapy or spirituality or anything related to normal understanding of our society, I would say that move towards rationality. Move towards understanding human behavior, move towards having empathy for others. This would result in a much more better society and our life altogether. So yeah, that would mean.
Thank you. I think it's a nice